Hope everybody is doing well. It is a Wednesday afternoon, which means it's time for another online dinner party. And we'll have people dropping by, sharing their life lessons, their life stories, and all along those lines. So, got some more guests lined up. And of course, it's always a fun conversation. And of course, right here in Durham, North Carolina, we're having some bouncing around weather, as I was telling the gentleman at one of the corner stores, because sometimes I spend way too much time up there getting junk food and other things that I probably don't need in my life and all along those lines. But as I was telling that gentleman that is one of the regular clerks there and everything, 1 minute it feels like it is winter and it's definitely on the chilly side. I think right now we're in the 40s, and in the evening time it's been like around the 30s. But then there were some days not that too long ago that we were in the 60s. So we're having the typical bouncing around North Carolina weather as we often have. And I know Big Sarge will be joining me in a little bit, and he's got some experience of the North Carolina weather as he spent some time in the military and definitely spent some time down there at Fort Bragg and all along those lines. And I've got some other guests that might have some different experiences in where they are. And of course, a lot of people are paying attention to everything from politics to sports. This is a Super Bowl weekend and all along those lines. So a lot of people are trying to figure out whether they think the Kansas City Chiefs or the San Francisco 49ers will be the winner of that game that'll be coming on Sunday. And actually, one of the founders of the network, Kim Calhoun, is actually, I think, on her way to Vegas and should be getting there this evening. But she's going there for the Super Bowl week because the game is the big activity. There are activities that are going on all week long. So I think that she's got a chance to be there with some doctors, Steinberg, and some other people that are over there doing some events. So I think she'll be there from Wednesday to Saturday. Unfortunately, she will not get a chance to go to the game, but maybe she'll catch up with some of the folks that are there that are going to the game, and maybe we'll have some interviews with her later on and that space where she might be lining up some entrepreneurs and some athletes and others in that particular venture that she is at. Because, like I said, she should have flown out already, and she should be there this evening and be there till I believe Saturday. But like a lot of us, she'll probably be watching the game from home because I don't know of any Super Bowl parties that I'm going to, but maybe Jeffrey Ryan, one of my other guests, has a Super Bowl party that he's heading to, or all along those lines. And of course, we oftentimes think about our family connections and the people that were in our family that sometimes have left us as well. Because I know Leona Rosenthal, who is another one of the guests, deals with a lot of that and has a great book about care of our elderly and all along those lines. And I know that I have lost some uncles, including some uncles that were very much into football. One that was a coach of I think it was the defensive players and all along those lines for North Carolina Central University, and did some coaching and playing at the Canadian Football League. But he passed away not that long ago. But he was definitely a football fan and have some other cousins and second cousins that are past coaches. One of them, I believe, is still at a private school now or a charter school, but at one point he was athletic director at one of our schools there in Raleigh, the state capital here in North Carolina. But I'll bring in my guests, see what they've got going on, and learn a lot about them, and we'll just have some fun conversation and all in that way. The first one I'll bring in just really quickly is Big Sarge, and then I'll bring in Leona as well, but definitely wanted to bring Big Sarge in so I can learn more about what he's got going on, and then that space, because I know that I found you through StreamYards. I know you've been using this platform and all along this line and everything, and are a fellow podcaster. So when did you first get into podcasting, and how was your day going? I know, as I said, that you spent some time in Fayetteville and all along those lines. So North Carolina, but you might not be in North Carolina now. But I was just wondering your thoughts as to how you're doing and how the weather is treating you.
Hey, how you doing, man?
Good, good.
Yeah. So currently I'm up in Baltimore, Maryland,
Okay.
and I've come across your page, particularly your podcast, is because I actually enjoy the entire work-life balance. I
Mhm.
enjoy because I relate it all back to relationship balance and everything. So once I see it, I get to start hearing different viewpoints, how it works. That way, how I can get more information, better myself professionally, better myself as a podcaster and as a person.
No doubt about that. And one of the other guests, I'm gonna bring them in really quickly because I know that they have a book that deals with that work-life balance. Because sometimes that
Right.
work-life balance can be disturbed by the fact that you have to take care of your parents and all along those lines. But sometimes you also got bold parents as well, because my dad just recently had some stuff going on with his heart and all along those lines. But he decided that he was going to take himself to the hospital, and definitely did well. And now he's back home doing his art and a number of other things that he's involved in. But he was one of those people that was not necessarily going to let other folks dictate his care. But I do know that a lot of times people are concerned about their care. Both of my parents, my mom and dad, are in their early 80s. Dad is about 83 going on 84, and mom is 81 going on 82. So definitely they are in their 80s, and both of them are still independently in their own homes, and definitely getting around quite well at that age. But I know that isn't always the case. So I want to bring in Leona Rosenthal, who talks about that whole notion of legal guardianship. And I love the title of her book, which is Protecting Mama. Sometimes you got to protect mama, and all along those lines and everything. So how are you doing, Leona? I think you're over there in the Southwest, if I remember correctly.
I am, and the sun just came out here.
Okay.
So we are very happy. We had snow, we had rain. We have whatever California has a couple of days later. So we've had quite a bit of rain and snow.
Yeah, y'all get a little bit later. Now, I'm just going to say that I know that you've been very much involved in that notion of taking care of people, and sometimes we know that that has to happen. But I've been fortunate so far that both of my parents are able to stay in their own home. But I know that sometimes that isn't always the case. Sometimes they have to go to assisted living homes or things along those lines. But I've been fortunate that neither of my parents have had to do that. But I do know that mom is getting a refit, because she had a sister, because there were four of them all together. One of them has passed and everything. So it's mom and the two remaining sisters. They did have a brother, but he passed like as a infant and everything. So it was four sisters, and three of them are still around. And when the one that passed away, Aunt Carolyn, was around, she had MS, and they had to build the lift for her to get around and everything. So that's something that mom built in to the house that she lives in currently. And right now they're trying to make sure that the lift is upfitted, because there are other family members that are getting older, including some that are getting having ailment even at a young age, like around their 40s and 50s, and all in that space. So she just want to make sure that the lift is working. And I know that's oftentimes things that we don't think about. So I think getting it upfitted.
It's very important, and it's not necessarily, as you just said, it's not necessarily age related, Mark.
Right.
It's capacity related. What can someone physically do? Yeah, it's a big issue, and a lot of people deny. And when they deny long enough, sometimes there's an accident and someone's really badly injured. And then they find out that they should have paid attention earlier.
Yeah.
And
No doubt.
what I'm trying to do is get people to pay attention earlier, so that we don't have the predictable accidents. We only have the unpredictable things that come out of the blue, and you can't predict them. But there are things that are predictable. If people are going up and down stairs and they can't make the stairs, it's predictable they're going to have a problem, and you need to fix it in advance. Because I have a friend who she said, I talked to my friend on the phone, and she said they have to move to a house that's on one level because her husband has dementia. What on earth does that have to do with it? I said, well, you weren't born learning how to climb stairs, were you? Didn't you have to learn how to climb stairs? You can learn it, you can forget it.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
I never thought of that. Never thought of that.
Yeah, a lot of people don't think about things like that and everything. And a lot of people don't think about guardianships. I know that there have been some political cases that have brought guardianship to the forefront, and all along those lines. I think there's some of the issues around conservatorship and guardianship, even with some of the people that are done life changes and all along those lines. I think that's been part of the conversation with Cher and her now son, and all along those lines and everything. But I was just wondering, do you think that we as a society know enough about guardianship and are prepared enough for guardianship, and even being able to take care of our elderly citizens? Because a lot of times it's not till it is comes upon us and everything that we then start shopping around and being prepared. Because I know that friends of mine that, like I said, I've been fortunate that my parents are still very active in the society and haven't had to go that route. But I do have friends of mine that have had to shop around and find a home or a place to keep their family members at, and a lot of times they wanted to be like here in Durham. We've got one that is very known for taking the citizens and the residents out to like music concerts and things along those lines. So they want to make sure that they are engaged, even if they are living in these assisted living kind of areas.
Yeah, it's very important to understand the person and what the person needs.
Right.
And if you care about the person, you want them to have as much as they can possibly have of the things they enjoy. Very often people think that the things they enjoy should be basket weaving, and that becomes a problem. They don't like to weave baskets. They're very frustrated. And you need to know what you're getting into. I like to call it, it's like a fire drill. If you prepare for a fire, you hope there's never a fire.
Right.
I hope there's never a fire. You hope there's never a fire. But if you've got a kid in school, they're going to have a fire drill.
Right.
Because if there is a fire, you want to make sure that they're safe and they get out okay. And the same thing is, I think, what needs to happen in families, that there needs to be better communication and there needs to be an understanding of certain types of illnesses like dementia, which is a terrible illness. And I experienced it with both my husband and my mother. My husband had Parkinson's and my mother had Alzheimer's. Wow. And the worst thing it does is it changes the way the person thinks and how the person can think. And they become a different person. They're not the person you knew, and they don't think the way that you remember them thinking. And sometimes it's not good for their physical health or their mental health to think that way. And so when you try to protect them, sometimes they don't get protected adequately because the government comes in and says, well, they are thinking that way now, so that must be the way they always thought. And no, it's not, unfortunately, because you knew them a lot longer than the government did.
You definitely knew them longer than the government did and all along those lines. But you mentioned something, and I'm going to bring in Jeffrey Will and hear some of the things he's got going on. But you mentioned something that I wish, and I know part of the reason they founded this network is they are of the opinion that we need to teach more about fiscal literacy and business development and a number of other things in the society and even in our school system. And I remember, even though I don't remember participating in them all that much, this whole notion of health checks, like the whole checking your ears and everything else that would be there. And I have had older friends of mine that talked about this whole notion of like some disaster drills, whether that was a bomb drill or a number of other things, as we were much earlier in the Cold War kind of attitude and all in that space. I grew up in the 70s in terms of my grade school years and all of that way, but I do have friends that grew up definitely in the 60s that talked about that, and even some in the 70s. But my nephews who are going to be 14 and then 15, well, they're 14, 15 now, so they'll be 15 and 16 in later on this year in August. And all in that space, I don't know that they're being taught that stuff. So I'm just wondering, your thought, is that something that we need to do, some of the old-fashioned education that we used to have and all along those lines? Because I don't even know if they're teaching some of the things, including how to deal with the parent and the family structure the way that they used to.
I don't think they're doing much that's helpful. I'm one of those people who remembers hiding under the desk when we had a bomb drill.
Right.
Not that I really think that the desk would have been much protection against radiation, but at least it gave us an illusion of protection.
Right.
It made us feel better. Oh, we're doing something. We have some way we can protect ourselves. But there are actual ways that you can protect yourself in terms of, physical disability or perhaps oncoming mental incapacity. And one of the ways is for everybody to understand how the family is structured, both financially and emotionally, so that you can work within that and you can help each other. Otherwise, you work in two mules pull in different directions, you don't get very far.
Yeah, just really quickly, like I said, I'm going to definitely bring in Jeffrey. But before I do that, Bob, Big Sarge, you've been involved and you were definitely in the military. So what is your take on that? Because I'm sure you might have even had some military deployments to some of these places that have been hotbeds, and maybe even growing up, you might have remembered doing some of these things. Like I said, definitely, I remember hearing about those bomb drills, even though I think I might have missed them to some degree. And I definitely remember those ear tests where they would be checking, making sure that were in good health and all of that. But you're probably a little bit younger, so I don't know if your thoughts around this notion of some of these things that were going on back in the 60s and 70s that might not have been going on when you were stationed in the military.
Well, I think, first of all, thanks. I'm not that young. I did 30 years in the Army, retired back in 17. So since then, going back to what, it's Leonie?
Leonie. Mm-hmm.
Leonie, what she was saying as far as the preparation, as you can imagine, when you're not deployed in the military, you're preparing to be deployed. So if anything we know is preparation, prepare. So going back to what she was saying as far as people being prepared, practicing, getting everything done. But it's one thing that I didn't take into account that you said, Leonie, that I thought was beautiful, is that you don't take into account that people forget and need to be retaught those things. And one of the big things that happened, my mother-in-law, she was suffering from dementia before she passed. And they didn't have any counseling or anything about it. It's kind of weird that you said that. I mean, because when you say it, it makes sense. But I'm thinking that there were no counselors to give us a heads up on exactly what's happening. It's almost like this is the diagnosis, here's what's happening. By the time we put her in a home, we still didn't exactly know all of the things that we could have done as a family, to prepare for everything, except pray. But that's a beautiful thing to have that heads up like that.
Yeah, but along that same line and everything, just really quickly, because you actually made me think about something. Because my cousin Emmett is in a retired military, and all on those lines, and his brother is a GBI officer, so they definitely have lost both of their parents, both their mom and their dad. And I know that when people, I'm still in that single space, even in my 60s and everything, but when people are getting married or they're having children, there's a lot of preparation for those life events. There is a marriage counseling. There's a number of other things that go on and everything. Leonie, we all, I hate to say it because I'm personally going for 200 and not doing anything to actually get to 200 because I do have an occasional drink and I do eat way too much fast food and everything. But part of it is your mentality. So I'm just going to say that I'm going to go for 200, even though I know realistically that's not going to happen and everything. But I don't think that we are prepared to deal with either our own death or the death of family members and all along those lines. So I just wondered your thoughts about that, because it seems to me that there should be courses in order to deal with this inevitability that we will all have to deal with and everything. Because I know a number of people that don't have the capacity to deal with the things that are going on in terms of the care, but also there are a number of people I know that don't even have their own wheels and their own matters in order and all along those lines. But I just wondered your take on that, Leonie, because it does seem like there are a lot of people that are dreaming and wishing that they will live forever. And we know that that's not going to happen at all in that space. And I don't know, because it is the fear of the unknown that we're prepared to deal with these arrangements. I know some people that are smart and already know where they're going to be buried and already know what the casket will look like. But there are others, or what the arrangements will be, because not everybody wants to get buried and everything. But there are others that are sitting there going like, my family will figure that out when it happens.
Right. And it's a very different way of feeling about the world when you don't have a clue and you don't want to tell anybody because you really don't know. I'm thinking 150 years ago, you can picture when people were living on farms and they were living in the normal rhythm of life, everybody saw the progression of life. You saw life being born, you saw life growing up, you saw life maturing, and you saw life leaving this earth. It was true with the farm animals. It was true with your relatives. People understood better. They understood, I mean, back in Shakespeare's time, he wrote about it, the ages of men. You're young, you're middle-aged, you're old, you're really old, and then you die. Right. People don't believe that anymore because we have a lot of fantasy that we can watch where people either live forever or cheat death or do this or do that. And it's a fantasy. It's still a fantasy and it's still people's fantasy, but it's not reality. We don't, any of us get out of this world alive. We just don't.
That is very true and everything. Just really quickly, and I did want to get to the work-life balance and some of the other things that Sarge alluded to that, but I wanted us to also meet Jeffrey, our other guest. So Jeffrey's been hearing some of this conversation, and you'll share how things are going in your neck of the woods and where you've got going on. And of course, we'll continue because a lot of these things are tied together, I find out in life, including that whole work-life balance, and something that I love talking about on this show that I'm getting ready to get to for all of us, which is this notion of that inner critic and everything. But Jeffrey, share a little bit about yourself as well.
Great. Greetings from Maine, southern Maine, where there is snow on the ground, and it's abnormally warm, actually, which is weird. It's going up to 50 this weekend with snow on the ground, which is bizarre, but then it will go back down again. One of the things that Leonie was talking about that really hit home with me, just to chime in before I do my quick who I am and what I do and work life. I think one of the things that really hit me as my parents were getting older is trying to find the comfortable space between allowing independence and knowing when to intervene or make your thoughts known in that arena. Very difficult. One of the things I found was short visits do not give you the insights that longer visits with them allow. And one thing that really hit home with me was I was doing kind of as I could, visiting with my folks who were both, my dad was 90, my mom was 88. And they seemed to be fine. They seemed to be the same old people. But the thing was, their routine was hiding, their daily routine was hiding little slips that were starting to happen. And if they have a routine that they depend on and you depend on seeing, it's easy to visit and say, oh, they're okay, and go on with your life. When you start visiting longer and spending time with them, they have less ability to hide those little slip-ups, as you will, leaving the stove burner on, that kind of stuff, where all of a sudden the alarm goes on. So it really occurred to me, and I learned this a lot when I was doing advertising work, is the value of bringing someone in from the outside who can see a 30,000 foot view of what's happening versus the familiar view that you have or think you know. Getting that insight from other people is as important, I think, as taking care of them and watching for their welfare yourself.
No doubt about that. Just really quickly, Jeffrey, because I know one of the things that you do and that you're involved with, and this is actually for both you and Leonie, and if Sarge wants to jump in, I'd love to hear this and everything. But one of the things that sometimes happens is that there are people that are very active. They are active in life. I've had a number of friends of mine that have been bicyclists or they have been involved in the hiking world. I knew a young lady that was maybe in her middle ages of around 40 or 50 that was very into rock climbing and all along those lines. But, as we get older, we can't always do the things that we used to do, even when we did them as a middle age or an older citizen and everything. So I was just wondering, what kind of advice would you give to people that want to stay engaged, even if their body is telling them that they can't be engaged? Maybe they're going to watch it on TV, or maybe they'll do a virtual reality version of it, because I'm thinking that there are a number of people that would love to be able to still scuba dive if they were scuba divers, or still be able to mountain climb if they were mountain climbers, but sometimes the body and the aging process won't allow them to have that adventure that they used to have. Because I know you've been very much involved in the hiking space as part of what your book is about and all along those lines. But I'd love to hear both of your thoughts around how people can stay engaged if the clock is ticking away from them, for lack of a better term.
Number one is reframe the way you look at what you do. In other words, bite size is just as valuable as large, audacious. As I've gotten older, and my hiking buddy and I, or when I go out and hike alone, I'm more realistic about what I want to accomplish. And what I'm finding is, as I get older, the hikes are more spiritual, if you will, or I slow down more and observe things more than I do when I'm going 4 miles an hour up a mountain, or trying to make it about the goal. If I make it about the experience instead of the goal, then I'm doing two great things. One is I'm allowing myself to actually see the world around me as we were just discussing, as it is, and not miss things. This morning I went out for a drive, and I was on my way to the post office and saw 5 bald eagles perched in a tree, and stopped and pulled over and took some video of that. And if I'm rushing from here to there, I'm not noticing that. And it's the same when I'm out on foot. Just I'm out there to enjoy nature and take a deep breath and do something good for myself. And part of my strong belief is you can't give people the best of you unless you give yourself the best of you, which is go out, take care of yourself, eat right, try to get outside every day and do some writing. And for me, and those are the big 4 for me. Try to learn something.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a big fan of observing nature. Sometimes if it's just a quick walk to the bus stop, I may observe a rabbit that's out there, or maybe a deer or something else. Because yes, even in the city limits of Durham, you might run across those animals and everything, and it might just be watching a squirrel run across the street that can give you those simple joys and all along those lines. I've been involved for a number of years, probably over several decades, with the Eno River Festival, which is at one of our state parks here in North Carolina, and all along those lines. But Jeffrey, I was just wondering your thoughts as to whether we are doing enough to protect the public lands, because I know there's the Grand Canyon and over there toward the west, and there are a number of other public lands, some that are federal, some that are state. And I have a acquaintance of mine that has actually gone around taking pictures of, I think, all of the national public parks and all along those lines. I think he's going to make some kind of digital or virtual kind of presentation with that, because he's definitely in that land as well. So definitely Derek Rowe is doing some work in that space. But I just wondering your thoughts about the importance of public land and whether we're doing a good enough job of preserving it.
Oh my gosh, the importance of public land to me is fundamental to everything that I do. My writing, my being outside and enjoying these places that largely people had the foresight to set aside for us to enjoy. So I feel a real personal connection with those places, and I feel that I need to try to encourage people to do what they can to help keep them that way. And the way we do that is fundamentally by supporting the parks in any way we can. It doesn't even have to be financial. We can go out and help do trail maintenance, or take a working vacation at our national park, or any of those things. Are we doing enough? The question is always around, to me, is how much money do we have to do what needs to be done, and have there been lapses in some of that funding that have made things worse than the recovery costs of that is worse than if we had just kept supporting them all along with a smaller amount of money. The second part is just the sheer human powered part of getting all of this done, and the daunting task of doing that. And the third part is the funding, and making sure that the funding is important to us and consistent. We do have an amazing number of public lands available to us, be them historical monuments, national parks, wilderness areas, national forests, BLM land. There's an enormous amount of land to enjoy. The other piece of this is making sure we enjoy it and don't ruin it in our wake. And we all are responsible for leaving the place at least as we found it, if not better, by picking some things up that other people might have left on the ground or whatever. But that's a big challenge. And one of the things that I have seen, quite honestly, slipping is that educational piece about what it means to go out and take care of this resource that, frankly, all of us own. Every one of us have the ability to go visit these places, in many cases for free. And let's not blow it.
No, and along those same lines, and I'm glad you brought that up because one of the places, and I'll be going there later on today because I go there at least twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week because they have different dance classes and everything. But one of the places that I work when I'm not doing this podcasting work is at a historical venue. It is an African American historical venue here in Durham, North Carolina, called the Hayti Heritage Center, and that's part of what we've been doing is having the pews restored because it was a converted AME church that is now a cultural arts center, even though there have been some churches that have rented it for their services, including a major church that left a few years ago during the pandemic and everything, but they were definitely still using it. But I agree because we try to make sure that the stained glass is maintained, including some stained glass that has some interesting history, because one of the stained glass pictures is actually of Mr. Duke, because Mr. Duke of Duke University fame gave some money to the folks, even though it was part of the historical Black Wall Street that Durham is known for, just like Tulsa is known for as well. But he gave some money and he had a moment in my mind, because I do some historical talks around it, a moment of vanity, because his picture is actually more prominent than that of Jesus Christ himself. And talks, I actually talk about
Go
that.
figure.
He's literally at the top, and you can see him at the top quicker than you can see Jesus Christ. So if you come into a performance and you look to your inside and to your right and look up, you'll be like, wait a minute, his picture is the biggest one of all. So yeah, sometimes people have their moment of vanity, but I do agree that we have to maintain, and I know a lot of presenters will also talk about acknowledging the land that they are on, meaning that they will acknowledge some of the ancestral space that has existed, including some of the Native American tribes that had been here before any of us got here, and all along those lines. So I'm always glad when people choose to do that, and I've seen even parks do that as well.
Thank you for mentioning that. There have been some rather historic efforts in that regard in the last couple of years, particularly around involving local people in the management of the public lands, whereas it used to be almost always a top-down from Washington out.
Yeah.
The local, there's been much more of an effort to get local citizenry involved of all stripes, of all different backgrounds and all different concerns, to sit at the table, and not only to sit at the table, but actually be heard and affect policy. In the past, there sort of has been my feeling has been, come sit at the table, and now we'll continue to do what we were doing before.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the case anymore. At least I've been hearing some really promising stories about that.
That's good to know that those are promising stories and all on those lines. Maine has been in the news lately. I know Nevada's been in the news as well as, and also Arizona. But I just wonder, because one of the things that people think about Maine, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this since you are calling that area home, is that it is very independent. I know that there have been, certain presidential candidates that have been taken off the ballot in that area, or a certain presidential candidate. And I also know that just recently today on the news, we were talking about the fact that apparently there are new laws around sex trafficking that y'all just passed as well. So apparently Maine is being very much a pioneer in a number of areas. So I just wondering your thoughts about Maine as an area, because some people are like, that's that little small state. I don't really know that they're doing all that much, but they seem like y'all do a lot of stuff and have a very activist population.
Yeah, Maine's a really interesting place. I was born and raised here, so it's very independently minded. People vote for policies, not for people, by and large. They believe in the outdoors. They believe in protecting wild areas, as it is a very important part of our history. Logging, fishing, have always played, tourism have always played a major role. So by protecting the areas, we sort of help ourselves in many ways, spiritually and financially. What's really an interesting sort of marker of the proclivity of the people to protect the outdoors here is that every, I think, 6 years or so, there's a Land for Maine Futures Fund that's put on the ballot. And it overwhelmingly passes every time to earmark money for the state to go out and identify places that need to / can be protected as part of our conservation effort holistically. And it includes islands, it includes inland properties, it includes riverfront, it includes historical landmarks. It includes farmland. So there's a really high percentage of people believing that that's fundamental to who we are, to our identity. And I think that's a pretty neat sort of marker about that. We have had an independent governor before. We have an independent legislator right now. Senator King is an independent. Yeah, you know, so it's a really interesting state. There has been a lot of development in the southern part of the state, so you find a great divide between the sort of 1/3 most populous lower part of the state and the 2/3 largely still forested and agricultural 2/3 of the northern part of the state. In fact, the northeastern part of the state, the county, Aroostook County, is the largest county in the state. And when you drive up there and drive out of the woods and into the potato fields, you honestly think that you're in Iowa or Wisconsin or someplace where it's just wide open fields. And the people that I know have been up there come back and say, my God, that's Maine. They can't believe it because they think it's all going to be forested all the way up to Canada, but it's not the case. So
not the case, and that's the way I feel about North Carolina, because I jokingly say, and anybody that visit North Carolina, we are one of the few states that can say that we gave you both Jesse Helms and Terry Sanford, because we definitely have a kind of a extreme on both sides. So we definitely,
one of whom did the Appalachian Trail, right?
Yep, exactly. Exactly. So yes, so we definitely have that wide ranging kind of ability, and definitely it is seen like Florida and others as a swing state and everything. This is for both you and Leonie, because I know that both of you are authors, and maybe even Big Surge is going to want to write a book, and I know that I've been approached and everything. But what are your thoughts around, because I've heard this notion that everybody has a book in them, everybody should write a book, and I've heard some other people say that no, every book doesn't need to be published and everything. But I just wanted y'all's take on this, and what advice do you give to folks that are thinking about writing a book, and do you believe that everybody has a book within them?
Go for it, Leonie.
Okay. Everybody has something that they might want to preserve and give to others as a testament, as a roadmap, as a help. That doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be given to the world as information. I think we have an information glut in this world. There are places or entities that designate themselves as academies for anybody to walk in and create a book. And you can do it in 30, 60, 90 days, depends on the advertisement that you get. The quality of the book, the quality of your understanding of the material may be variable because you have certain talents, whatever those talents are. And if you decide you want to write a book about baking and you're not a baker, and you write a book about baking because you hear it's popular this month, next month it might not be popular. You've written a book about baking and it's sitting there on the Amazon list and nobody's buying it because nobody needs a book about baking. We have a few books about baking. So the question is, what is it you need to convey to people? Do you have a message? Do you have a mission? If you have a mission, that's probably a bit different. In fact, I'm just reading the manuscript of a book that someone is trying to talk to us about the religious aspects of everybody not being perfect. Yes, quite true. Nobody's perfect. Does this individual need to write this book? He's not a minister. He says, I'm just an ordinary practitioner of Christianity, and I just want everybody to understand what I understand. Okay, fine. That's what he's telling people. And I'd be interested to see who wants to know that message better than they hear it from their pastor, from their priest, from whoever it is they're hearing it from, because I know that it's being preached. That message is definitely preached every Sunday. Yeah. No doubt about it. I think people who really feel an urge because of a close association with a subject to talk about that subject I think the commitment comes through in the writing. And that speaks to the heart of the person reading. And it says to them, this person really cares about the subject. This person really cares either about me or about the environment or about how we treat our elders or whatever it is they care about. It comes through in the writing. And that's where the communication comes in. And maybe the person who's reading is motivated to do something about that subject, which is probably the reason why someone would sweat over a book for a year or 2 years or 3 years, or someone would tell a story, or someone would record an album because they want to communicate something.
Yeah, along those same lines, Leonie, before I get to Jeffrey and hear his thoughts about the notion of whether everybody can read a book, how important do you think it is to belong to organizations that support the writers? Because I know that you are on the board of the Southwest Writers and the New Mexico Press Workers and all along those lines. So I just wondered, how important do you think it is to be part of a organization that is a support organization?
I try to put my time and money where my mouth is, basically. If I think it's important to have good writing and to communicate, then I feel as if I need to support people who do that. I could be supporting children's services. I could be supporting other things as well. But this, I think, is very important. And the last thing I did in support of writers was I endowed a scholarship for graduate students in journalism who are interested in the Bill of Rights and in preserving our freedoms, because I think that's a very important thing. I care about that very deeply. And it's part of what was in my previous book, that I fought for the return of my civil rights when they were taken away from me.
Yeah, along those same lines and everything, and this is definitely for both you and Jeffrey as well and everything. But one of the things I was going to say about that is that, because even on this network, we've had a number of people, including people from other countries, that have put out their copy of the Constitution, their copy of the Bill of Rights, and a copy of a number of other things. And that's one of the things that a lot of people are feeling is not being taught, though a lot of people don't necessarily know what the amendments are. I'm not even going to lie and say that I know all the amendments off the top of my head and everything. But
I'm having trouble reading what I'm being shown, but I know that it's
important. It's the Constitution. I just picked up a copy yesterday.
We're all in the same
same
area. Yeah, we all care about the same things. It's good.
No, definitely. But do you think that that's something that the school systems and the world is teaching enough of everything? So I'll start with you, Big Sarge, because you were in the military, but I'd love to hear from Jeffrey and Leonie. But do you think that we are getting taught enough about the things like what is going on in the Constitution and the amendments, both those that exist and those that might be being proposed and everything? But I just wonder, do you think that we are getting enough education in the civics?
Yeah, you know, Mark, if I didn't know better, I would swear you were sitting on my shoulder last night. Last night, my friends and I, we were literally just talking about, like, it should be a class given by the time students hit 9th grade on, one, how to interact with the police. Mm-hmm. You know, now, obviously being an inner city young man, you know, particularly a Black man, we raise our young boys to know how to do it. But I think sometimes when I see it played out on the world stage, it's almost embarrassing to the way that we handle law enforcement, you know, and that's just dealing with the basics. Because we used to always talk about, if, for instance, if I were pulled over and the police said that they had a bolo out, and people say, oh, they're just pulling me over because I'm a Black man in a good car, blah, 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 whatever it may be. But literally those police officers, because I have 3 friends that are police officers, literally could have an entire bolo for someone that looks like me or in this type car or in this neighborhood or something like that. And I think when by the time, if we start looking at the big picture, it'll be that, hey, this is to preserve our safety, our freedoms. You know, it's still people that complain about police lights. You know, we have cameras coming all into my neighborhood. I walk in, I raise my hand, I start clapping. I'm all excited. But some people, they don't like that because they think it's taking away their freedoms, where I look at it as this going to their protections. As far as what you were saying about the book, when I first started my podcast, this was almost like my virtual book.
Mhm.
You know, so on how I was going to relay my information to my children, to my family, my friends, just getting different insights. And then as I started I started working on I'm actually a spoken word poet as well. So when I first started, I had a book that I was going to write, and I was going to call it My Eulogy. So I had this entire vision on how my eulogy would go. You know, I was going around who would read it, who would write it. I was like, oh, it's going to end up being too long. I started writing it for about a year. It just got too long. Then I didn't know what parts to take out. So I think part of the writing a book on who will read it or who will benefit, I think a lot of times for the people that's going to write a book that may not reach the masses, that it can at least reach your family and friends, and that they'll know, you know, the different experiences, different judgment, different thoughts that you had when it came to particular things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hey, Leone, what do you think about that idea? Because I do know some other people that have done that as well, what Sarge is talking about. Because I do know some people that have written their eulogy before it was delivered, so that it was not a surprise what was being said and all along those lines. And I know that as a journalism major from Marquette, and definitely that knowing friends that are at some of the bigger newspapers like the New York Times and other papers, that there are some obits that are already written. Of course, they will update the obits after the fact because they already know that these people are known and are definitely well known. So before they pass, they've already written the obit. I think there's probably an obit written for Michael Jackson and for Prince before they passed. And then, of course, they added the reasoning of their death and a number of other things that were not going to be known, but the basic facts were already there and everything. But I'm just wondering your thoughts about this notion of having something already written down for that eventual ending.
I used to live in New York, and I lived in New York for years. And one of the growing jokes in New York was that the obituary writers for the Times used to go to parties to meet the people whose obituaries they were going to write. And they used to try to hide exactly what they did at the Times when they met these people because people knew who the obit writer was at the Times. And you think, oh my gosh, is this an omen? You know, is he wishing me dead? Did the Times think I'm going to die soon? Or, you know, what is this? But they did. They had those obits all ready to go. You can write your own obit. I knew people who did that. And they would give the obit to a friend and say, if I pass away, give this obit to the Times or the Tribune or whatever paper it was they wanted to run the obit. So absolutely, people used to do that all the time.
It's funny you mentioned that. One of my first jobs when I first got into commercial writing was I was working for a company that sold fly fishing schools, and people would go and learn how to fly fish. And they sent me to one of the schools so I could be one of the students and pretend that I was just taking the course. And if I told them where I was from, it would blow the whole thing. They'd act differently. So the first day I was there, someone turned to me and said, "What do you do for a living?" And I thought for a brief second. I said, "I sell insurance." And no one talked to me the rest of the weekend. So I learned that that's the greatest way to work undercover.
So just tell everybody that you're selling insurance, or if you really want to be avoided, you can tell them, because I did this briefly when I was in college, that you're that you're one of those door-to-door salesmen. Because I think I did for encyclopedias, or I did it for something else when I was in Milwaukee. I can't remember. I think it might have even been Kirby. It might have been the Kirby vacuum cleaner. For like,
I have another option for you. You could tell them you're an undertaker.
Yeah, that could work.
It worked like a charm. No one wanted to talk to me at all.
Yeah, those are definitely some careers that people are not going to want and everything. Just really quick, and this is for Jeffrey and Leone, but I'd love to hear from Sarge as well. I'm of the opinion, particularly during the pandemic, that we came back in tune with ourselves and everything. And to me, a lot of the growth of people is on a lot of different levels. So I think that there is the mental growth, which we do a lot of here on this show and on other shows here on Bud TV, which are educational in nature and everything. But there's also emotional growth, there's also physical growth, and there's spiritual growth as well. And I think a lot of people were coming in tune with all of those aspects of themselves in this last 2 or 3 years. But I was wondering, is that something that you have noticed all all three of you and everything. And are you seeing that more people are, now that we are able to get back out, are, trying to get back in touch with Mother Nature and trying to get back into that walking environment and trying to be more connected to, whether we want to call it the Most High God or whatever you want to call that higher force, but also being connected to nature?
Absolutely. And it's not just anecdotal. A lot of the outdoor equipment companies saw really big sales in, not big expensive gear for doing expedition type stuff, but just basic camping stuff or walking stuff, walking shoes, hiking boots, that kind of thing. And it was more for urban adventures or sort of light duty recreation, if you will. Huge surge in that, and that hasn't really slowed down. I think that one of the things is when you can't be around people, you kind of need to get outside to keep your sanity, and that really, even in all different types of environments, made people start getting up early and watching the sun come up, or get up and go for a walk or take part of their day and spend it outside. There was a huge upsurge, and I've heard that it hasn't really slowed much, that it was an awakening moment, that people realize that sitting behind a computer all day and into the night is not the best place to spend your life.
But on the flip side of that, I know that there's a number of kids, and like I said, I don't have anything of my own, but I do have my two nephews, and I don't know whether, I'm thinking Leonie probably has some, and I'm thinking you might have some, Jeffrey, and even you, Sarge, and everything. But I'm just wondering, there is a frustration among many people that the youngsters, particularly those in the Gen Z and the Gen X space and everything, are spending way too much time on social media and aren't getting out in the space of outside and nature and all along those lines. And I know that there are a number of parents that are frustrated by that because, the kid is going to school, and then after they go into school, they're throwing on their Oculus or whatever other form of virtual reality they want to get into, and that might have them doing nature in a virtual or imagined way, but it's not the same as smelling the real fresh air and all along those lines. But I just wanted your take on that and how we can get these young people more engaged in nature, or are they more engaged in nature than I think they are?
One thing that I've seen locally, and a friend of mine is the executive director of it, is there's an organization called Teens to Trails in Maine that their goal is to have an outdoor club in every high school in the state. And they have hundreds of them so far. And what they provide, they've gotten a number of grants and equipment donated from outdoor companies, and they take the kids on a variety of adventures. There's hiking, there's kayaking, there's canoeing, there's skiing, there's snowshoeing, there's all this stuff. And what they do is they provide training to a teacher within the school that volunteers to be the club, the head of the club. And then they provide all the training, including wilderness medical training, to be able to identify if people, everything from bug bites to sprained ankles to everything. And then they have leaders and co-leaders, and they take the kids out on adventures. And some of them are in afternoons, some of them are weekend days, some of them are 2 days. And it's been enormously successful. And in fact, the model has been starting to spread to other states as well. I think it's a brilliant idea, and it gives kids some guidance that is much needed, and confidence, quite frankly. It's not something that you have to do on your own. You can get your friends to join the club and get out there and enjoy yourself. It's non-competitive.
I'd like to import that to New Mexico. I have, we have a large amount of open space here. Many of the acres are BLM land. Many of the acres are Pueblo land or Indian land. About a third at least of the acreage in New Mexico is of that sort. So that it's for hiking, we've got mountains, we've got tableland, we've got desert. We have all of the things that people might like to hike on. And when I see kids in parking lots or walking down the street. The most obvious thing that I can think of is a sign that I saw today. It's a traffic sign, and it shows kids staring at a cell phone walking toward the crosswalk, and it says, "Caution, zombies crossing." And
That's
they look just like zombies looking at their cell phones. There's a boy and a girl, and they're gonna cross the street, and they don't know you're there. They don't even know each other is there, and they're standing next to each other.
Well,
So
I saw the craziest thing, Leonie, earlier today. It was actually a kind of one of those soap opera kind of movies and everything, and the couple was actually doing some heavy petting and some heavy kind of dating and everything going on. But at the same time, the woman was engaged in the cell phone. So I'm sitting there going like, doesn't that kind of defeat the whole purpose and everything? 'Cause
I would hope so.
Well,
like-
you asked earlier, is enough being done to protect the resources that we have, and that's where the future of the protection and the caring for those resources comes from. Is I was introduced to the outdoors at a very young age, and it directly led to me being an advocate for those places, and that's where the future lies. Quite literally. And it's important for us to get kids interested in the outdoors. As I said, it doesn't have to be a competitive scramble to the mountaintop or a competitive bike race or anything. It can just be, I'm going out with my friends and being led on this chaperone trip, and we're going to learn about sitting around a campfire and cooking s'mores and telling stories and getting to know each other in a place that's not connected by Wi-Fi.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. Just out of curiosity for Sarge and Leonie, is there, because I'm talking to Jeffrey there and everything, is there something that is on your bucket list or your wish list? Because I have definitely gone on some hikes. I haven't done them recently, but I've definitely done them at that park and walked around that. And I've definitely done some in the past bicycle riding, even though I don't have a current bike at the moment and everything. But I was wondering, is there any nature adventures that are on your wish list? Maybe you're hoping to go skydiving, because I had a friend of mine that tried to talk me into that, and I'm going like, no, that's all right. I'm perfectly good on using the plane to get from point A to point B. I don't want to fall out of the plane, but that was just my attitude about it. Other people might like to do it. Now, the rock climbing might be interesting, and some other things might be interesting as well, but I was perfectly fine not doing the whole falling out of a plane thing. But are there any wish list things that you're hoping to do that you haven't got to yet?
I'm on the fence about ballooning. I'm thinking,
It's great.
but
It's great.
It just looks so great when I see the
Oh.
balloons all rise, because we have this huge balloon fiesta in the fall in New Mexico. And you can watch all the balloons, and you can see Daffy Duck flying around in the sky, and it's hysterical. It's so funny. There's a cow that comes occasionally, and you see the cow flying, and there have been pigs that have flown. So the pigs have flown around here.
It's amazing. I won a balloon ride and about 20 years ago, and it was one of the coolest things I've ever done. It's so serene. It's so beautiful. I mean, the only noise is that giant brr, when they blow them up, when they lift up. But after that, you're just literally floating, and it's just amazing. Saw some amazing wildlife from up there, because it doesn't hear you. You're floating over deer, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Floated over a
Think
golf
about it more
course.
seriously.
Floated over a golf course, and a guy made a putt, and he had no idea we were there, and we all started clapping.
What about you, Sarge? Is there anything on your wish list of things you wanted to do?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I was in the Army for 30 years. And when I first came in the Army, I came in the Army wanting to be Rambo. With that being said, I literally came in the Army to be an airborne ranger. So it took me about 5 years to get there. But before I even got there, I was already at about 20 or 30 jumps at that time. And by the time I retired, I was at 103 jumps.
Wow.
So jumping isn't, or I guess what word did you call it, Lee? Skydiving.
Skydiving,
Yeah, it's not that fun after a while, you know. Now maybe if I could, I actually had a little fantasy of wanting to do a cliff dive one time, but those rocks just look so scary. I'm like, man, these people got heart, because it's almost like one miscalculation, it's over.
Yeah.
yeah. That
You
was my
know,
thing about cliff diving, because yes, I was like you. I looked down and I saw those rocks, and I was thinking, if you just miss it by one
I know.
little centimeter, you're kind of
Exactly.
toasted all on those lines.
But I think the big thing I have on my bucket list is when I was in Mexico the last time, I wanted to go to, I think it's Tulum, to do their, they have that sinkhole, or I can't recall what's the name of it's called, but it's like a underground lake or pool or something. So that's on my bucket list.
Yeah,
Wow.
definitely. There's some great things to see in Arizona and in Las Vegas. I've only been to Vegas once, and that was actually to visit a friend and all along those lines. And ironically, I went to Vegas and managed to not go to the Strip. So I did go to a theater and all along those lines, but I managed to go to Vegas and not hit the Strip at all. So if I managed to go back to Vegas, I might actually have to experience the Strip, even though I think we did hit part of the Neon area, which is outside of the Strip as well, but definitely did not hit the Strip whatsoever. But I did see the theater, because the theater is off the beaten track as well. They're famous Las Vegas theater. So I got to see a performance of actually Drumline. So I watched the Drumline when I was there, because they were doing a touring trip and all along those lines. But we got about another 30 minutes. I've thoroughly been enjoying this conversation. I hope y'all have as well. But one of the things I was going to ask, that I get to all the guests on every show about, and I was kind of curious to hear y'all's thoughts about this, is this notion of the inner critic. Because I am my worst critic, and I know that I'm my worst critic, whether it's around romance or whether it's around job opportunities. Because there have been job opportunities that I probably should have gone for, that I was having that whole conversation about, like, yeah, you won't get the job, you'll never get the job. And the same thing with romances, because there have been young ladies that I would probably should have courted, and I talked myself out of it. And by the time I got to around to asking them, they were like, one, the person had left. I remember one, and this was decades ago when I was in college and everything, and it was very interesting. But one of my friends said, oh, by the way, and she's now married. I think she's married to like a spy or a military type and everything. But she's like, she likes you too. And I'm going like, well, they'll tell me now. Why didn't you tell me at that particular time, and everything along those lines? But I was just wondering, for everybody, how do you deal with that inner critic? Because I know I can be my worst enemy, whether it's job hunting, opportunity hunting, because if you're an entrepreneur, you're doing opportunities as well, or whether it's romance hunting. So I'll start with you, Leonie, but I definitely want to hear from Jeffrey and Sarge as well. But how do y'all deal with that critic? It hits all of us, and it can be a horrible thing.
Yeah, I used to be worse than I am now. I used to be a lot worse. And it used to be very inhibiting, because there would be things I would, like you, Mark, not do. Oh, I can't do that because it's not going to come out well, or it's the first time I'm trying it, and so I'm afraid to do it, and all of that nonsense that happens when you second guess yourself, and instead of being adventurous, you're fearful. And so as I got older, I figured, life is too short for this nonsense. Maybe I'll do it and it won't work, and then I'll try it again in a new way, and maybe it'll work that time. And that's kind of how I get around it, that, maybe I'm not perfect, because I'm human. And I'm still going to be human, even if I get this one right. Maybe the next one I'll get wrong. And so what? I'll try it again.
That makes a lot of sense. What about you, Jeffrey, and everything? Because, like I said, I'm doing something that a lot of times we don't do a good job of dealing with, and unfortunately, we talk ourselves out of stuff. So, how have you dealt with that, and how do you get by it?
I had the best mother in the world for that, and a really difficult father for that. So my dad was very critical, and he would be trying to teach me, but he came across as a critic, and it was very harsh at times. It felt to me. Always hold the pencil straight up when you measure, or the woodcut will be, you'll cut the saw line in the wrong place and all that. And on the other side was my mother, and I think she kind of overcompensated for that. And I remember one specific time, she had told me I had a predilection from the very beginning. I was the what's around the next bend child. So she was always worried that I was going to be out of sight and not getting into trouble, but just trying to see what's over the next hill. It was hard to keep up with me. And I think intellectually, I've always done that. I'm very inquisitive by nature. But I remember one time when I was young, I was 11 or 12, and my mother told me that I wasn't going to go to school that day. And the reason why I didn't go to school is she thought it was really important to teach me how to make a souffle. And she said to me, you know, one of the hardest things in the world to make and one of the hardest things to be your own critic on is making a souffle. And people will tell you that it's really intimidating and that it will tend to fall down. And she pulled me out of school and taught me how to make a souffle. And I just thought that that was really kind of indicative of her take on being experiential in the world and just trying stuff and not looking back. And it's really helped my writing because I'll take risks in my writing and know that I can always edit it later if I still isn't sitting with me right. But it keeps me from self-editing when I'm writing, as I'm writing, which makes my writing better. And I think about that a lot because she gave me the freedom to make mistakes and not be criticized for them. And that has made all the difference to me. It's kind of a neat thing. It's actually more than kind of neat. It's a very loving thing to give a child.
Yeah, definitely. But along those same lines, and Leon, I was wondering your thoughts around that, because I do know some people that are not just their own critics, but sometimes those critics that are outside. Because like Jeffrey was saying, sometimes those family members can be the worst critics as well. So I was wondering how you have dealt with that, because sometimes those family members will tell you every reason that you can't do what you are doing and you can be a success. And I know that you've been a success in a number of fields. We didn't really touch on it, but I know you've been a success even in music and all along those lines. So have you had people that have told you that you could not be a success even with your music and with your love of East Asian medicine as well? So I'm sure that people are like,
oh, there were plenty of people who thought I couldn't do it. And I used to hear from them regularly. I heard it. It doesn't matter what field you're in, you're going to hear it from somebody. I had a grandmother who was supportive and very adventurous. My parents were very critical. And at one point I asked my mother, when I was all grown up, long after I was all grown up, why were you always so hard on me, Mama? She said, I wanted you to be able to survive anything.
wow.
And some parents do that out of caring for the child. We want to be sure you're tough. We want to be sure you're strong. We want to be sure you can endure. It's very hard on the child, I can tell you. My grandmother made up the difference. There's generally always somebody who makes up the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody close to you, you care about, they care about you, and they're nurturing. And it's the nurturing that carries you through and that you remember beyond the criticism. The criticism is useful. Ultimately, you can see it's useful.
Yep, it's definitely useful. But along those same lines, because I was a big supporter of my grandma, and she passed back in the early 80s. But she is part of the reason that I got involved in being a avid reader and definitely being involved even in some of this media space, because Grandma Molly was actually the person that invented or came up and created the first African-American library in our state capital. And I think she did that back in the 40s. So she did it at a time that it was not a prominent thing for an African-American woman to be doing. And she also went to Columbia University in that same time frame. So she was definitely a trailblazer and somebody that I still consider a mentor, even though she's been passed now for over 40 years and all of those times. But I still think of her as being connected from that ancestral ground, because I think that a lot of times we are still connected to those angels, even after they have left us many years ago and all along those lines. So definitely that's something that I feel that is a connection that we all need to maintain. I don't know how you and Jeffrey feel, but I try to maintain that connection with those people that have passed on and everything.
It's not hard to maintain. It's part of you.
Right.
Right. I as it relates to writing, I find what I've found is particularly when writers start out, and I learned this because I worked in commercial writing, so I had a little bit of a leg up on being able to take criticism because it came from all quarters. But I urge people who are starting to write to not shop around their work. In other words, don't hand out your work to dozens of people trying to get feedback from them, because you can be paralyzed by the feedback, some of which is well intended and not really spot on, some of which is, but you have to learn how to weed out what you think is valid in terms of improving your story or actually potentially diminishing it. And so what I've learned over the years is when I'm done with a manuscript, I have only two people that I generally give my manuscript to before I set it loose at the publisher. One is more of a grammarian. That's the second read. The first read I get is just give me he has a very innate sense of whether the story's working or it's not. And that's the most valuable type of critic at that juncture of the book for me is, what do you think? This is draft 17. It's ready to be looked at. What do you think? Give me your gut. And he's very good at being truthful. And I'm very good at being receptive to what he's saying, which is the other half of that. If we put up our defenses, we're not hearing the criticism that's perhaps valid or at least quasi-valid. And then I take it from there, because I think that a lot of times, like in art school, if you put out a piece of art and you let the whole class rip it apart, there can be a sort of jumping on, a piling on thing. And at the end of the day, you really don't know what to do with the feedback that you get. It can be crippling. It just can be overwhelming.
It can definitely be crippling. And even along those lines, I was just thinking as you were saying that, Jeffrey, that a lot of times we don't listen as much as we should. They say that there is a reason that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, because you're supposed to do twice as much listening as you do the talking and all along those lines. But a lot of times people are so busy not listening that they're not paying attention, and they're also not being empathetic, because I definitely believe in the power of empathy as well and everything. But a lot of times people aren't thinking about that and everything in that space. And Leonie, I was glad you mentioned that whole part of even around the faith in your grandmother and everything, because one of the things that I remember at the Hayti Center, which I'll be going to shortly and everything, there was a young lady that came to speak on Friday, because we sometimes have book authors, and The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. It was written by Deisha Phil, y'all, and everything, and she was there to speak. But she was talking about how she got, because we were talking about the ways that church and religion sometimes handles some very difficult conversations, or in some cases don't handle them, because she was talking about how when she was a kid, she got sent to school, and she couldn't figure out why she was sent to school, because she was somewhat of a to your point of being the kind of child you were, Jeffrey. I got the impression, and I don't know this lady other than having met her recently, that she was somewhat of a what we would call a smart ass child, and all along those lines. So she was actually asking her parents why she had to go to this church, but they didn't have to go to church. But what it was that they wanted her to get the moral upbringing, but they were both her mother and grandmother divorcees. And we do know that some churches, particularly some Christian churches, don't always treat the divorcee, and particularly the woman divorcee, that greatly, because there's sometimes that double standard that exists as well, because a man can do whatever he wants to in that church environment, but the woman sometimes get that whole cold shoulder, for lack of a better term, and everything along those lines. So it was very interesting. She brought that up in the book. She also brought up the power of food, because she was talking about how she had a friend that came that apparently he cooked the chicken the wrong way, and you can't have the chicken the wrong way or the macaroni the wrong way. You got these certain dishes that are regionally known, and you're not fixing it the way that folks are used to regionally, your friends and family will let you know that that's not the way that we cook it, and all along those lines. So you even run across that in Arizona, Leon. I'm sure there's some people that are like, no, that's not the way we do barbecue in this part.
Yeah. Who made that chowder? That's not the way we make it up here.
That's right.
Hey, Jeffrey, what you were saying about the writers or taking criticism, or not taking criticism, but being paralyzed. Do you think well, I noticed today that a lot of people are very sensitive when it comes to being critiqued. You know, my grandmother always used to tell me all the time, you know, eat the meat and spit out the bones.
Mhm.
And I see, unfortunately, especially for this generation, but it's not even this generation, the people that's in it, is that when by the time we say anything, it's almost like an insult.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
You
I,
know,
I agree. And it's the hardest thing, especially, you know, I'm going to sound like the old man I am, but the hardest
Mhm.
thing for a writer at any age, frankly, I think when starting out is separating the work from your own personality.
Okay.
It's a piece of work, and you know it's subjective, but it's not you. That they're not attacking you as a person, and I think it's important to separate that. I think, as I said before, I'm really fortunate that I wrote a mail order catalog for 13 years, and everyone who got to review everything that I wrote, there were dozens of comments on everything that I wrote, and you had to learn to be able to separate out, you know, this is nutty, this is kind of interesting, and this is in the middle. This is something I need to fix. Um, you know, or I'll get called on it. And that was really good training for that. And it's difficult not to take it personally because it's your writing. But at a certain point, it's someone's reaction to your writing, and then it's going to go out in the world. And how many people are like the person that gave you the criticism in the audience that you're writing for?
But
It's
I can give you an example of
yes.
something like that that was very, in a way, it was very severe criticism. I went to an online retreat with Jack Canfield, who's an author who's written a lot of books. And I knew him for a number of years before this. And he gave me an endorsement for the book that Mark mentioned, Protecting Mama. And I had another book I had written that was about adult guardianship, and it was very, very dark and negative. And I was concerned about it. I wanted his opinion. And he looked at the book and he said to me, read it. He said, "You have to give people some hope. You haven't given people hope here."
Mhm.
And I said, "It's because I don't feel like there's much hope in this system." And he said, "Go back and do some research and find the hope that you can give to others." And so I went back, I did the research. I said, "What connects all the people who have been telling me that they have had trouble with
Mhm.
adult guardianship, with the guardianship of people over 21?"
Mhm.
And everything that linked was some problem in the legal system of getting the right attorney, getting an attorney in time, getting an attorney who was really on your side. Because all of those things were not happening to the people I had spoken to. And I'd spoken to hundreds of people, and they were all telling me horrible stories about their experiences. And
right.
so I sat down and I said, okay, what they need is access, timely access,
Mhm.
and access to people who can actually help them and are interested in helping them. And so I came out with a totally different book. That's it's the one that's behind me over here. That's called Legal Protection
Mhm.
for individuals, families, and small businesses. And it actually tells people how to get that help and how to have like legal insurance. So if you have a problem, you can just pick up the phone like the rich people do and talk to an attorney. So
Mhm.
you have that line, that helpline available to you, which you didn't have before. And that's basically what I did. And when I showed it to Jack, he said he would write the forward for it. So
Right.
he wrote the forward for it. So I ended up with something much better than what I had before. Now I got to go back and redo that other manuscript with the knowledge that people actually do have hope available. But
Thank you for saying that, because that brings to light another story that I have very similar. It's knowing when to bring in professional help, and
Exactly.
taking that advice in and not going, I've already written this thing, I don't feel that way. I had written my first historical fiction novel. Everything else has been nonfiction, and I got to this point in it where the story was fairly well defined, but I hadn't taken it so far that I would not take criticism. I knew if I kept polishing it, I'd be more hesitant to take criticism. So I got it to a 3/4 polished, and then found a person who was a book architect, and he looked at the book and said, the structure, that I would move this scene here, and I would make this linear part of the book happen this way. And when I got it back, it was like the big light bulb went off. It was similar to the feedback that you got, which was, oh my God, this adds so much more suspense to the story. Instead of a linear, this happened, this happened, this happened. It's like that sort of, oh wow, it took a shift and it pulled people in. And it was invaluable advice. And I knew when to ask for the help, which was important, but equally important, I was open to accepting the feedback. And it made a much better book. It's been one of my most popular books.
Oh, wow.
And it wouldn't have gotten there without him.
Before that and everything, and before we end it all along those lines, there's two very popular words. I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts about this word, because a lot of times people have a hard time with the words, even though one only involves 2 letters, the other only involves 3 letters. But it's something that I know authors have to hear. Sometimes they don't want to hear the 2-letter word. But I was wondering, to both of you, and if Sarge wants to jump in as well, how do you deal with those infamous words called no and yes? Because definitely those are 3 words that a lot of times authors have to face, and all along those lines. And sometimes that no can be a hard one to deal with, but it is something that we get, even if you're sending in manuscripts or a number of other things. So how do you deal with that? Those 2 infamous words, like I said, no is only N a no, and yes is only YES. So how do you deal with those infamous words that can sometimes be very promising for the yes and everything, but sometimes it can crush you when you get the no's, and that can even be in business dealings as well. So how do you deal with that no and the yes, and particularly the no?
Want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
Do you
Go
have
ahead,
anything? Go ahead.
Okay. I can be pretty stubborn. My first book was rejected 100 times before it was accepted. I have a pile of rejection letters. I just kept at it. I was convinced that what I had written was useful, and people are still reading it. I still get letters from people who say, I've just read this book, and that was published in 1979. So that was a while back. And yes, I did do it, and I pushed on, and I finally got a yes from somebody.
Yep.
I think there are 2 things for me that one is the quality of your work, and make sure that you do your homework. It's make sure you have the best piece of work that you can possibly put in front of the publisher. And the second part is do your homework, because they're going to ask you questions. Who's the audience for your book? You think that they're going to do that, but they don't. They want to know if you know. Who's your competition in that space? Is it a popular subject? Is it, will it pique enough interest for us to make a profit, quite frankly? They're looking at that. Of course they are. They're a business too. That being said, I did my homework on Appalachian Odyssey, my first book, and they said, why do you think this will be interesting? And I said, there are literally thousands of books of people who have hiked the Appalachian Trail. I can't find a single one about somebody who did the Appalachian Trail in 28 years with the same friend by doing little pieces at a time. And the whole idea of stick-with-itness, taking on a ginormous project by doing it incrementally, and there just were no books about doing it that way. I had all my journal notes from all of those years that I made the manuscript with, and I had all the photographs that I had taken, and it was a compelling case to the publisher because I said, I have the whole story. I have all the pictures. I have the story, and I have the maps that show what it was like and where we camped. And they immediately said yes. And I was willing to go around and promote it, which is the other way to get to yes. If you're willing to put the time and effort into going around and meeting your audience where they are, that certainly helps. But has every proposal been met with yes? No, they haven't, and it's really difficult to suffer that without knowing that it happens to everybody every day, and you have to get back on the horse again. Really quickly, I have a funny story. I was driving through Shenandoah National Park, and I saw the headquarters building, and a little voice in the back of my head said, "You should turn around and see if they'll carry your book." And I kept going and talked myself out of it. And at the next scenic overlook, I turned around and went back and said, "No, I have to go back and try." And I walked in there, and there was a woman in the Park Service regalia, and I said, "I'm here. I've written a book. Would you be interested in carrying it?" And she said, "To be honest, no. I don't even know what it's about, but I'll tell you that we get so many hundreds of submissions that whole room behind me is full of people dropping off books." And I said, "That's okay. I understand." And I come again, and I said, "I didn't, but I'm from Portland, Maine." And she went, "Oh my God, they have the best bakery up there." And I said, "Two Fat Cats Bakery?" And she said, "Yes, that's it." She goes, "Do you go there?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "I just took a vacation up there. I loved it." And she said, "I'll tell you what, go to your van and get your book, and I'll see what I can do." And I ran out to the van. I gave her a book. And 2 weeks later, my publisher called me and said, "What did you say to the National Park Service? Because they're carrying your book. We've been trying to get it in there forever." And I think it sort of goes back to the perseverance thing and following your gut. And, who knew that baked goods would get me into the National Park Service? But there you have it.
The baked goods got you in there and everything. We said about 5 more minutes ago, and there's a question I ask everybody. But before I get to that, just really quickly, and this is for everybody around Robin, really quickly, how do you deal with the work-life balance? Because that's something else that I talk about on the show quite often. And I know that a lot of times people are trying to figure out how they can balance multiple jobs and sometimes balance relationships if you are in relationships and all on those lines. So just really quickly, before I get to the question I ask everybody, and of course, I want to know how y'all can be contacted, but how do the three of you deal with that work-life balance? I'll start with you, Sarge.
I'm going to start it off. Work-life balance. I'm old school. So being old school means that I come from I'm probably going to put in probably 70 to 80% work up front so that I can coast through towards the end. So, because that's normally when your adrenaline's pumping high. So I'm coming at everything pretty hard up front. But I'm really coming at it because I know that towards the end, I'm going to coast through. So that's how I did the work-life balance. And when I relate it to the inner critic, my inner critic is the Sean, you can do it. Sean, you can do it. Sean, push through. Sean, push through. So, yeah, I don't slow down until it's time to slow down. So that's how, and I have the mindset for it. So now, if you don't have the same mindset for it, it's almost like by the time I go to the gym and I know that today is going to be my centennial day, I'm going to be doing 100, 200 reps of everything. I literally program my mind to be able to push through it like that because I know tomorrow's going to be a rest day. So that's how I do my work-life balance.
That makes sense.
I push through because I'm going to cruise at the end.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about yourself, Leonie, and also Jeffrey as well? And then, like I said, there's that final question that I asked everybody who got about 5 minutes ago. But how do you deal with that work-life balance?
I generally start with watching the sunrise, which is beautiful and makes me want to pray and meditate. And then I do some of that, and then I go to work. And if I've got a whole list of things to do, I'm going to do a small thing that I can be happy about at the beginning of the day, because that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the day. And no matter what I've got after that, I got that thing done. And I can feel good about that while I'm trying to slog through the rest of it. And then at the end of the day, I can relax because I've done at least one thing that I knew I needed to do, but that I enjoyed. And the rest of the things that I got done, yeah, they were on the list too. And I checked them off. And now I can relax.
That makes sense. What about yourself, Jeffrey? How do you do that work-life balance?
I walk an hour every day, no matter what, rain, shine, snow, whatever. And I usually do it in the morning, first thing. But depending on the forecast, I'll keep a weather eye on and take the best part of the day in terms of precipitation or whatever it may be. I try to vary it time of day too from time to time. And as Thoreau himself said, it's a walking meditation is good for the soul. You observe things in your neighborhood, in nature, about yourself. And most importantly, I do it without music or distraction from technology. I just walk for the pleasure of walking. And the other thing I try to do is go sleep in the woods in a tent at least once a month, year round. That just lets me be in touch with nature and go through a whole 2-day cycle of being outdoors uninterrupted. It's wonderful.
Yep, sounds wonderful and everything. One of the things that I do, and this is for everybody here, and I'll start with you, Leona, is if folks can learn how they can get in touch with you and how they can be reaching you, and if you want to give your website and the information on the book. And then one of the things that I do on every show is I am a big believer, and that's why I mentioned empathy earlier, about the power of positivity. So even though we're going through this crazy world that we're going and all these crazy things that are happening in the world, whether it's Ukraine or Israel, Palestine, or a number of other things, I figure that if I do this show once a week and some of the other shows, and I get everybody to say a positive thing or their message of positivity, we can change the atmosphere and change a little bit of the direction of the world. So it's my little personal mission that I've kind of got going and everything. So I've had probably hundreds of people that have given their message of positivity. So if you'll let folks, everybody here on the show, I'll start with you, Leonie, Jeffrey, and Sarge, if you'll let folks know, Sean, as well, as your ways that you can be reached. And I know, Sean, you've got a podcast, so if you want to tell people about that and your message of positivity. But I'll start with you, Leonie.
You can contact me, my first name, Leonie, at dayspringresources.com, which is the organization that I started to help people make life better for themselves and their families. And that's basically my mission, and my message is communicate and prepare, because you never know when you're going to have to use that information. If you don't have it, you need to get it. And the best time to get it is like planting a tree. It was better 30 years ago, but today is good too. Today is the best time. Between now and the future, do it today. You'll always thank yourself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about yourself, Jeffrey, if you want to tell folks how you can be reached and also your message of positivity?
Great. I can be reached at jeffryanauthor.com, JEFFRYANAUTHOR.com. My message is show gratitude every day and try to leave the world better every day at the end of the day. And it can be a little thing like holding a door open for someone, smiling to someone, picking up a piece of trash. There are so many different ways that you can do little things to leave the world better than when you walked into it that day. And that little example helps other people.
Yep, no doubt about that. Sarge, Sean, if you want to let folks know about your podcast, and you want to give a pitch to that, and also any message of positivity that you would like to share as well. And then I'll get out of here with a message from some friends of mine that talk about the notion of things. This one is around education and all along those lines, because there's actually an award show there they talk about education that comes out of Oklahoma. So I'll probably end with that and a financial service PSA as well. But definitely, if you'll tell folks how you can be reached and what you've got going on and your message of positivity.
Well, Sean Allen can be reached at the Business Side of Relationships on every platform. So the only platform is not the Business Side of Relationships is on what used to be Twitter, because they wouldn't let you use as many letters. Other than that, my message of positivity is that relationships take work. And I think sometimes people just think that love is going to save the day. And my message is to say that it takes work. You know, you have to put effort into it. And if you put effort into it, it'll turn out great.
No doubt about that. A very positive message from all three of you. As I said, these dinner parties, I invite different people by, and I like to have repeat guests as well. So I know Leon has been on the other shows before as well. So definitely, I hope that Jeffrey and Sarge, Sean will make return trips and everything. But this is the dinner party as part of Pod TV, and I hope to see both of y'all back in the near future, because I love having repeat guests, and I hope that y'all enjoyed this conversation as we were having our evening afternoon time and this lovely dinner party. And I love doing these on Wednesdays and giving the chance for folks to meet new folks that they may not have known about, and all along those lines. So I hope y'all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed conducting this interview and conducting this time with y'all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem. And on that note, we're going to get out with some notes about, like I said, education and financial responsibility with some fine folks over there at Prosperity Financial Services. And that'll get us on out of here. But this particular gentleman from Oklahoma is honoring, and I think he's been doing it about 5 or 6 years, not just the teachers. Teachers are very important, but also honoring the guidance counselors, the janitors, and a number of other people that are a part of that education system and all along those lines. So he just did one, I think it was in the latter part of last year. He's already planning for the one in 2024. So let's check out what this award show is all about, and also the financial responsibilities also. And I'll be rushing off to that historical building that I was talking about earlier so I can get to check that out. So let's get on out of here.
I won't fold, I won't drop until we on top. Only going non-stop. I won't fold, I won't drop until we on top. Only going non-stop.
I want to thank everyone for coming to the 2020 TAF Awards. This was a show like no other, people. This is the Grammys for dignitaries, educators, and support staff around the state of Oklahoma and worldwide. We cannot do this without the support of the people. So we thank you. I thank you for being such a dedicated supporter to this movement for the Teachers Appreciation Foundation. I thank you.
I won't fold, I won't drop until we on top. Only going non-stop.
Are you looking for money-saving strategies for your business and personal finances? Are you tired of working hard every day with little or nothing to show for it? Contact Prosperity Financial Services, LLC right now for your free financial consultation. Call now to reserve yours today. 804-349-8600. 804-349-8600.